A luxury car breaks down, bringing traffic to a standstill and leaving a businessman furious and embarrassed. A young girl covered in grease offers to help, a worn-out notebook in her hands. When he starts the engine, he realizes it wasn't the car that needed fixing. If the story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The mansion rose atop the hill like a fortress of glass and concrete, far from the city that glittered in the distance. Within those walls, silence reigned supreme. There was no music, no casual conversation, no natural hum of an inhabited home. Only the occasional echo of hurried footsteps down the hallways and the nearly imperceptible whir of the HVAC system. Robert Miller was 43 years old, with a fortune few could spend in 3 lifetimes. His medical technology firm was responsible for patents that had revolutionized the treatment of heart disease, and his name regularly appeared on the Forbes list. But none of that mattered when he climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor where his son's rooms were. Gabriel was 8 years old, brown hair always neatly combed, dark eyes that rarely met another's, small hands constantly occupied with silent puzzles. From his first few months of life, doctors had confirmed the devastating diagnosis: profound bilateral hearing loss, accompanied by mutism. Irreversible, they said. Genetic, they explained. Final, they sentenced. Robert had scoured the world for different answers. Clinics in Switzerland, specialists at Johns Hopkins, experimental therapies in Seoul. Each trip cost a fortune. Each attempt ended with the same cold, impersonal conclusion. The boy couldn't hear, he couldn't speak, and he probably never would. Guilt consumed Robert like a slow, steady acid. His wife, Marianne, hadn't survived the complications of childbirth. The hemorrhage had been sudden, inexplicable for a pregnancy that had been problem-free. She had left behind a baby who didn't react to sounds, who didn't cry loudly, who existed in his own inaccessible world. Robert looked at Gabriel and saw everything he had lost. He saw Marianne's absence. He saw his own failure to protect her. He saw the impossibility of connecting with this child, who carried his blood but lived in another dimension. The mansion reflected this isolation. Every room was impeccable, decorated by renowned professionals, equipped with state-of-the-art technology. But there was no life there. The staff performed their duties in respectful silence, communicating only what was necessary. The tutors who worked with Gabriel followed rigid protocols, applying motor coordination and visual stimulation exercises, but without affection, without warmth, without any real hope for change. Robert kept a safe distance from his son. He ate dinner in his office, traveled frequently, and spent weeks at conferences he didn't need to attend in person. When he returned home, he watched Gabriel from afar, through security cameras installed in every room. He saw the boy assembling his puzzles, organizing his toys in perfect rows, walking unhurriedly through the indoor gardens. And he felt an immense emptiness, an inability to love that shamed him deeply. It was on a rainy Monday in April that everything began to change. Julia Evans was 38 and had been working at the mansion for 6 months. She was responsible for cleaning and organizing the East Wing, where the guest rooms that never received guests were located. She was a discreet, efficient woman who always kept her eyes down and performed her duties without asking questions. But on that day, Julia had to bring her daughter with her. The girls' school was closed for emergency roof repairs, and the neighbor who usually watched her was sick. Julia hesitated for a long time before asking her supervisor, knowing that the presence of outside children was discouraged at the mansion. But the man, perhaps moved by a rare moment of compassion, allowed the girl to stay as long as she remained quiet and out of the way. Isabella was 7. She was small. For her age, thin, with black hair tied back in a simple ponytail. Her brown eyes carried an old sadness, too heavy for someone so young. She didn't talk much. She always carried a worn-out backpack from which she would pull out sketchbooks and colored pencils faded from use. While Julia worked, Isabella sat in a corner of the secondary living room, busy drawing. She drew all the time, with an almost obsessive concentration. Sad flowers, houses without doors, solitary human figures. Every line revealed something she couldn't express in words. The problem started when Isabella, bored with staying in, the same place decided to explore. She walked down the gleaming hallways, her old sneakers making a soft sound against the marble. She went up a side staircase and reached the 3rd floor without anyone noticing. That's where she saw Gabriel for the first time. The boy was sitting on the floor of his room, surrounded by the pieces of a complex puzzle. He manipulated them with mechanical precision, fitting each piece without hesitation. Isabella stopped at the half-open door, watching in silence. Gabriel looked up and saw her. He wasn't startled, didn't move abruptly. He just observed her with that distant gaze that seemed to look through people without really seeing them. Isabella took a step forward and sat on the floor, a few feet away from him. She opened her backpack, took out a sketchbook, and started to draw. The two of them stayed like that for several minutes. Gabriel assembling his puzzle, Isabella drawing a solitary tree. Neither of them spoke, but there was no discomfort in the shared silence. When Julia finally discovered where her daughter was, she nearly had a heart attack. She ran upstairs, her heart pounding, imagining the trouble this could cause. But when she reached the door to Gabriel's room, she froze. The two children were sitting together now, closer. Isabella was showing her drawings to Gabriel, who was observing them with genuine attention. He pointed to one of the figures, a lone girl under a grey cloud, and something in his face changed. An almost imperceptible expression, but one that Julia recognized as real interest. Isabella then did something unexpected. She took a red pencil and drew a small sun in the corner of the paper, then held the sketchbook out to Gabriel. The boy picked up a blue pencil and carefully drew birds flying toward the sun. Julia felt a lump in her throat. In that simple, silent moment, there was more connection than she had imagined possible. She took a step back, deciding not to interrupt, and went downstairs with her heart racing. In the following days, the situation repeated itself. Julia had to work, and with the supervisor's reluctant approval, Isabella came with her again. And always at some point, the girl would go up to the 3rd floor. Gabriel would be waiting for her. They developed their own language made of drawings, invented gestures, and looks that said what words could not. For the first time in 8 years, Gabriel smiled, a small, almost shy smile, but a real one. And Isabella, who carried the weight of a recent loss that no one in the mansion knew about, seemed to find a refuge for her own pain there. Robert found out about the girl by chance. He returned from a 3-day trip and, as usual, checked the security camera recordings. That's when he saw the two children together, drawing, creating a private world that didn't depend on sounds or words. His first reaction was anger. How dare they allow a stranger near Gabriel? What guarantee was there that this girl wasn't some kind of risk? He was about to call the supervisor and demand an explanation when something stopped him. On the screen, Gabriel was laughing, a silent laugh, but visible in the way his shoulders shook, in the way his face lit up. Robert couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his son laugh. He turned off the monitor and sat in the dark of his office, his hands trembling slightly. This unknown child had achieved in a few days what he hadn't managed in 8 years, and that terrified him as much as it fascinated him. The next morning, Robert made a decision that would change everything. He summoned Julia to his office. The woman entered, pale, her hands clasped nervously. She was sure she would be fired, that she had broken protocol, that she had risked her only source of income. But Robert didn't fire her. Instead, he made a proposal she never would have expected, and it was in that moment that the first thread of a much more complex web began to unravel, revealing secrets that had been buried for years in the foundations of that silent mansion. Robert's proposal was simple, but it carried a weight that took Julia days to fully process. He would allow Isabella to continue coming to the mansion, not just on the days her mother worked, but whenever she wanted. In return, Julia would take on more responsibilities. She would directly manage the organization of Gabriel's rooms, ensuring the girl and boy could spend time together under proper supervision. Julia accepted, though a part of her hesitated. There was something in the intensity of Robert's gaze, in the way he spoke about his son while maintaining a disconcerting emotional distance that made her uneasy. But Isabella needed this. Ever since they lost Peter, her older brother, in a bicycle accident 6 months earlier, the girl had withdrawn into herself. She stopped playing, stopped smiling, and started obsessively drawing those melancholy images. But with Gabriel, Isabella was a child again. They played in ways that seemed strange to an outside observer. They created games without clear rules, built stories without words, and laughed at jokes only they understood. Gabriel, who had always been indifferent to the efforts of the therapists and tutors his father hired, reacted to Isabella's presence with a liveliness that surprised everyone. Weeks turned into months. May arrived with its warm afternoons, then June with the cool winds that signaled the start of the coastal fog season. The routine in the mansion subtly changed. Robert began spending more time at home, though he avoided direct encounters with the children. He watched them through the cameras, studied their movements, and tried to decipher their inexplicable connection. It was on a rainy Saturday in July that everything changed again. Julia was on the third floor, changing the sheets on Gabriel's bed, when she heard Isabella shout. It wasn't a scream of fear, but of surprise mixed with excitement. She dropped everything and ran to the playroom. The two children were on the floor, surrounded by toy boxes that Isabella had opened. Among the forgotten objects, she had found a child's doctor kit, complete with a plastic stethoscope, a needleless syringe, a pen light, and other toy instruments. Isabella had already put on a makeshift white coat made from a sheet and declared she would be the doctor. Gabriel had accepted the role of patient with unusual enthusiasm. Julia smiled, about to go back to work, when something made her pause. Isabella was using the pen light to examine Gabriel's ear, mimicking gestures she had probably seen at doctor's appointments. The girl leaned in, shining the light into the boy's ear canal, and suddenly her face changed. "Miss Julia," she called out, her voice filled with confusion. "There's something weird in here." Julia approached, her heart speeding up for no apparent reason. She took the penlight from her daughter's hand and looked. In Gabriel's right ear, partially visible, was a dark mass. It wasn't just ordinary earwax, but something denser, darker, occupying a large part of the canal. The air seemed to leave Julia's lungs. She felt her legs weaken and had to lean against the wall. That image awakened memories she had tried to bury. Peter, her son, was 12 when he started complaining of headaches and difficulty hearing. It took doctors weeks to find the cause, a severe infection that had spread because a foreign object had been lodged in his ear for too long. By the time they treated it, it was too late. The infection had spread, compromised his nervous system, and led to complications no one had foreseen. Peter spent 3 weeks in a hospital bed before he passed away, leaving Julia and Isabella shattered. And now, looking into Gabriel's ear, Julia saw something frighteningly similar. She took a deep breath, trying to control her panic. Gabriel watched her with those calm, dark eyes, not understanding the tension that was gripping the woman. Isabella took her sketchbook and began to draw what she had seen, with a disturbing accuracy for a 7-year-old. "Isabella," Julia said, her voice trembling. "Put that away, don't show it to anyone yet." The girl obeyed, sensing the seriousness in her mother's tone. That night, after Isabella had fallen asleep, Julia did something that could cost her her job. She accessed Gabriel's medical files. The mansion's security system was strict, but Julia knew the supervisor's password, which he wrote down in a little notebook he kept in his office drawer. It was a serious violation, but she had to know. The files were extensive, dozens of reports from doctors in different countries. They all confirmed the same diagnosis: profound bilateral sensorineural hearing loss, irreversible, genetic. All the tests pointed to a congenital condition that no treatment could reverse. Julia spent hours reading every document, every test result. It was then, almost by chance, that she found something buried deep in a scanned folder. It was an old report, dated from when Gabriel was just 3 months old. The paper was scanned in low quality, somewhat faded, but legible. Patient presence with bilateral auditory obstruction. Possible impacted cerumen and unidentified material. Immediate removal via irrigation or suction is recommended. Simple procedure. Excellent prognosis. Julia read and reread that paragraph. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear her own blood pulsing in her ears. That diagnosis was completely different from all the others, and it was signed by a doctor, Fernando Lewis, who worked at the hospital where Gabriel was born. She kept searching and found something even more disturbing. A handwritten note, almost illegible, in the bottom corner of the page. Removal recommended. Awaiting administrative authorization. Request denied at Procurement 4478. Julia didn't understand. Why would they deny a simple procedure that could solve the problem? And why was that initial report never mentioned in any subsequent document? She copied everything to a flash drive she kept in her purse, cleared the access history, and went back to her room at the back of the mansion, where Isabella slept, peacefully. But Julia couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, her mind racing. On Monday, Julia asked her supervisor for a day off, claiming she needed to handle personal matters. She took Isabella with her and went to the high-end private hospital where Gabriel had been born, a place famous for serving the city's elite. In the lobby, Julia approached the reception desk, her legs trembling. "I'd like to speak with Dr. Fernando Lewis," she said, trying to sound confident. The receptionist, a young woman with flawless makeup, typed on her computer. "Dr. Lewis no longer practices here. He left the hospital about 8 years ago. Do you know where I can find him?" The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice. "He works at a community clinic in the East Side neighborhood. But may I ask why you're looking for him?" "It's personal," Julia replied, holding Isabella's hand tightly. The clinic was small, located on a busy street where street vendors competed for space, a world away from the luxurious hospital. Julia went in with Isabella and waited for nearly 2 hours to be seen. Dr. Fernando Lewis was a man in his late 50s, with graying hair and tired but kind eyes. He welcomed Julia into his cramped office filled with files and old but well-maintained equipment. "How can I help you?" he asked. Julia took a deep breath. She knew she was about to cross a line she couldn't uncross. "Doctor, I work at Robert Miller's house. I take care of his son, Gabriel." Dr. Lewis's expression changed instantly. He turned pale, his eyes widening. "Gabriel Miller?" "Yes, and I need you to tell me the truth about what happened when he was born." The doctor was silent for a long moment. His hands trembled slightly as he got up and closed the office door. When he sat back down, his face was etched with a mixture of guilt and relief. "I've wondered all these years if someone would eventually find out," he said, his voice low. "And now you're here." "What did they do to that boy?" Julia asked, feeling tears burn her eyes. Dr. Lewis clasped his hands on the desk. "I diagnosed a simple auditory obstruction. It was completely treatable. But when I submitted my report, I was called into administration. They said the family preferred to seek treatment abroad, that they didn't need my services." A week later, new reports appeared in the system, signed by international specialists, all confirming irreversible congenital deafness. "But that doesn't make any sense." "No, it doesn't. And when I questioned it, I was encouraged to leave the hospital. They offered me a considerable sum for my silence and my quiet departure. I had debts, a family to support. I accepted, and I've lived with this guilt ever since." Julia felt the floor drop out from under her. "You mean Gabriel was never really deaf, that this was all a sham?" "I don't know why. I don't know who was behind it, but that boy was condemned to a life of silence for reasons I never understood." Isabella, who had been quiet beside her mother, tugged on the hem of Julia's shirt. She showed him the drawing she had made, the image of what she'd seen in Gabriel's ear. Dr. Lewis took the paper and examined it closely. "She drew this?" he asked, impressed. "If this is really what's in the boy's ear, it's likely impacted cerumen, maybe mixed with cellular debris. After 8 years of build-up, it must be completely hardened. Can it be removed?" The doctor hesitated. "It's possible, but I can't do it without parental consent. It would be unethical and illegal." Julia stood up, her decision already made. "What if I do it?" "You don't have medical training." "But you can guide me." Dr. Lewis stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded, and in that instant, an unlikely alliance was formed, born of guilt, desperation, and the determination to right a wrong that had destroyed 8 years of an innocent child's life. Julia returned to the mansion that night with a racing heart and a dangerous plan in her mind. She didn't know who was behind the cruel lie, but she knew she had to act, and she also knew that when she did, There would be no turning back. What she didn't imagine was that her actions would trigger a chain of events that would reveal secrets far darker than she could ever conceive. Dr. Lewis spent 3 nights teaching Julia the basic procedures. They met at the clinic after hours, when there were no more patients. He showed her how to sterilize simple instruments, how to hold a child's head firmly but gently, how to identify warning signs that would require an immediate stop. "You're taking a huge risk," he said on the last night, his voice heavy with concern. "If something goes wrong—" "I know," Julia interrupted, "but that boy deserves a chance, and if I don't do anything, who will?" She returned to the mansion on a rainy Friday, carrying a small insulated bag with sterilized instruments, hydrogen peroxide, delicate forceps, needleless syringes, clean cloths, everything prepared with obsessive care. Her plan was simple: take advantage of a moment when Robert was in his weekly shareholders' meeting, which always lasted for hours, to perform the procedure. But fate had other plans. That afternoon, Robert cancelled the meeting. He was at home working in his second-floor office. Julia found this out too late, when she had already prepared everything in Gabriel's room. The children were excited, Isabella holding the boy's hand. And Julia felt her heart pound. She could wait. She should wait. But something inside her screamed that this was the moment. That every day of waiting was another day stolen from Gabriel's childhood. "Isabella," she whispered, "stay by the door. If anyone comes, you stomp on the floor 3 times, understand?" The girl nodded, serious and focused. Julia positioned Gabriel in a chair, the light from the window illuminating the right side of his face. She put on the latex gloves she'd brought, took 3 deep breaths to calm her trembling hands. The boy watched her with absolute trust, without fear, without hesitation. "This is going to hurt a little," she said, though she knew he couldn't hear her. She made a gesture with her hands, indicating mild discomfort, and Gabriel nodded. Julia started by applying warm hydrogen peroxide with a syringe. The liquid entered the ear canal and began to soften the hardened mass. Gabriel flinched but remained still. 5 minutes later, Julia took the delicate forceps and, with extreme care, began to remove small fragments. The work was slow, meticulous. Each piece extracted revealed more compacted material underneath. It was like peeling layers of an onion, each one representing months or years of neglected build-up. Julia felt tears stream down her face as she worked. How could they let a child suffer like this? 15 minutes passed, 20. The bag next to Julia filled with dark, damp fragments. Gabriel remained quiet, trusting. Isabella watched the door with the tension of a soldier on a battlefield. It was in the 23rd minute that it happened. Julia removed a particularly large piece, and suddenly she felt the resistance give way completely. The ear canal was clear. She carefully cleaned the final residue and leaned back in the chair, exhausted. Gabriel blinked several times. He turned his head from side to side, confused, and then, coming from the hallway, the sound of footsteps echoed. Footsteps he had never heard before. The boy froze. His eyes widened, his mouth fell open in surprise. He looked at Julia, then at Isabella, then at his own hand, which he tapped lightly against the chair. The sound of the tap, however small, reached his ears for the first time in 8 years. Gabriel began to tremble, not from fear, but from something much bigger, much deeper. He looked at the wall clock and heard the ticking that had always been there, invisible to him until that moment. He heard the rain tapping against the window. He heard his own breathing, and then, with a visible effort, he opened his mouth and produced a sound. "Tick," he whispered. The word came out strange, off-key, but it was a word. His first word. Isabella abandoned her post and ran to him, her eyes shining. She took Gabriel's hands and said, "Can you hear me?" Gabriel looked at her, processing the sound of that voice he had only known by the movement of her lips. "I hear," he replied, each word a monumental effort. Julia was about to celebrate when she heard the footsteps approaching. Fast, heavy steps. The door burst open, and one of the mansion's security guards entered, alerted by the unusual noise. The man took in the scene. Julia with bloody gloves, instruments scattered, Gabriel with a red ear, Isabella between them. His hand immediately went to his radio. Code red in the boys' room, unauthorized medical situation. Julia's blood ran cold. In less than 2 minutes, the room was full of people. More security guards, the supervisor, a nurse from the private medical team. And cutting through the crowd with a fury that made the air feel heavier, Robert Miller. He saw his son with blood on his ear, saw Julia with the instruments, saw a frightened Isabella. His mind processed the scene and came to the wrong conclusion. "Get that woman away from my son!" he yelled, his voice echoing off the walls. "Call an ambulance, detain her." 2 guards grabbed Julia by the arms. She didn't resist, but she cried out, "Mr. Miller, please listen to me. I didn't hurt him. I helped him." "Helped him?" Robert strode forward, his face contorted with rage and despair. "You broke into my son's room, performed some unauthorized procedure. He's bleeding." Isabella tried to get between the adults. It wasn't like that. She saved him. But no one was listening to a 7-year-old. Robert ordered them to take Julia to a security room in the basement while they waited for the ambulance. Isabella was taken to another room, crying. The chaos was total. Robert was left alone with Gabriel. The nurse quickly examined the boy, checked his vital signs, and looked at his ear. "It's just superficial bleeding," she concluded. "Nothing serious, but he needs to be properly examined at the hospital." Robert knelt in front of his son. "Are you okay? Did she hurt you?" Gabriel looked at his father. For the first time in his life, he was truly seeing this man not just as a visual figure, but as a complete presence. And for the first time, he answered, "No." His voice came out low, hoarse but clear. Me saved." Robert froze. The entire world seemed to stop. He looked at his son, then at the nurse, then back at Gabriel. "What did you say?" Gabriel with effort repeated, "She saved me. I hear, Dad, I hear you." The word Dad struck like lightning. Robert felt his legs give out. He had to lean on the chair. 8 years. 8 years of silence, of distance, of giving up. And suddenly, in an impossible instant, his son was speaking. His son could hear. "How?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "How is this possible?" But before Gabriel could answer, the door opened again. It was Tyler, Robert's cousin and the chief operating officer of the family company. He rushed in, phone in hand, his expression worried. "Robert, I came as soon as I heard." "What happened?" Robert couldn't answer. He was paralyzed, staring at his son as if he were seeing a ghost. Tyler approached Gabriel, pretending to examine the boy with concern, but his eyes betrayed something different. It wasn't relief that shone there. It was fear. In the basement, Julia sat in an empty room, her hands still shaking. She knew she would be arrested, that she would lose everything, but she didn't regret it. At least, she thought, she had given Gabriel what he deserved. She had given him back the world of sound. What Julia didn't know was that at that very moment she was being filmed. A tutor from Gabriel's team, moved by the scene he had witnessed, used his phone to record a short video. It showed Gabriel reacting to sounds, Isabella hugging the boy, and the chaos that followed. That video, sent anonymously to a news site before the night was over, would change everything. Because in less than 12 hours the entire country would know that the son of billionaire Robert Miller, thought to be deaf since birth, had just heard for the first time at the age of 8. And when the truth began to emerge, it would reveal a conspiracy that involved much more than just medical negligence. It would reveal financial interests, institutional lies, and a betrayal that came from within the family itself. Robert, still kneeling before his son, had no idea of the storm that was about to break over his life. All he could do was hold Gabriel's small hand and listen, for the first time in 8 years, to the boy's voice saying, "Dad, don't let them take Miss Julia, please." And in that simple plea, filled with a broken innocence, Robert finally began to understand that he had lost far more than he had ever imagined. The video exploded online like a wildfire. In 6 hours, it had 3 million views. In 12, it was the top trending topic on social media. Reporters camped out in front of the mansion before dawn. Cameras aimed at the gates, microphones extended to anyone. Who emerged? Robert watched the video sitting in his office, his phone trembling in his hands. The recording was short, but devastating. It showed Gabriel reacting to the sound of clapping, turning his head to locate noises, smiling as he heard music for the first time. And it also showed the moment the guards dragged Julia out of the room, while Isabella screamed and Gabriel cried. The video's captions were even worse. Billionaire keeps son in forced deafness. Heroic employee exposes medical scandal. Robert couldn't process it. He had ordered Julia's release immediately after Gabriel spoke, but the damage was done. The whole world believed he was a monster, that he had intentionally neglected his son, that the fortune built on medical technology had failed to save his own child. Tyler entered the office without knocking. "We need to control this now. I've already called our PR team. We'll issue a statement saying you were a victim of medical malpractice, that you trusted the wrong diagnoses." Robert barely heard him. He was reading the comments under the video. Thousands of them, accusing him of monstrosity, demanding an investigation, calling for Gabriel to be removed from his custody. "Robert!" Tyler slammed, his hand on the desk. "Are you listening to me? We need to act." "Why?" Robert looked up, his voice dangerously quiet. "Why did this happen? I spent millions on doctors, on specialists. How did no one see it was something simple?" Tyler averted his gaze for a fraction of a second. They were professional errors. It happens. Not on this scale. Not with so many different doctors in different countries, all reaching the same wrong conclusion. "What are you suggesting? A conspiracy?" Robert didn't answer, but something in the way Tyler said that word, with a slightly defensive tone, set off an alarm in his mind. Meanwhile, in Gabriel's room, something extraordinary was happening. The boy was sitting on the floor with Isabella, wearing headphones connected to a tablet. Julia, whom Robert had asked to remain at the mansion until everything was sorted out, supervised as Gabriel explored the world of sounds. He listened to music and laughed. He heard his own name being spoken and tried to repeat it. Every sound was a discovery, every word an achievement. But amidst the joy there was also confusion and fear. 8 years of silence don't disappear overnight. "It's a lot," Gabriel said, the words still difficult but improving with each attempt. "Everything and so much noise." Isabella held his hand. "You'll get used to it, I promise." Julia watched them with a heavy heart. She knew her life was ruined. She had already received calls from lawyers, from journalists wanting interviews, from people offering money for her side of the story. But all of that seemed distant when she saw Gabriel smiling. Just then, she received a text on her phone. It was from Dr. Lewis. "Call me urgent, I found something." Julia left the children with a trusted tutor and called him back. The doctor's voice was tense. "Julia, after the video went viral, an old colleague from the hospital contacted me. He worked in the administrative department when Gabriel was born. He said there are things that were never told." "What kind of things?" "He wants to talk in person, but only somewhere discreet. He's scared." "Scared of what?" "Of the same people who told me to shut up 8 years ago." Julia felt a chill. "Where?" They arranged to meet that night at a cafe far from downtown. Julia brought Isabella because she had no one to leave her with, and the girl sat quietly at a nearby table, drawing as always. The man Dr. Lewis brought was named Charles. He was in his 60s, with completely white hair and the sunken eyes of someone who hadn't slept well in a long time. He ordered black coffee with trembling hands and began to speak in a low voice. "I was the administrative coordinator at the hospital back then. I had access to all the records, all the procedure approvals. When the Miller baby was born, there were 3 intervention requests in the system. 3 different doctors noticed the auditory obstruction and requested its removal." "3?" Julia leaned forward. "The report I saw only mentioned 1, because the other 2 were deleted, and I was the one who deleted them, under direct orders from Tyler Miller." The name landed like a bomb. Julia and Dr. Lewis exchanged shocked glances. "Tyler? Robert's cousin?" Charles nodded. "He showed up at the hospital 2 days after the birth. He said the family preferred specialized treatment abroad, that they didn't want any procedures done there. He offered me money to ensure no local doctor treated the child. A lot of money. But why? What interest would he have in that? I don't know. At the time, I thought it was just a matter of prestige, of not trusting local doctors. But later, when I saw the new reports coming in, all diagnosing irreversible deafness, I started to suspect. Suspect what? Charles took a long sip of coffee. There was a trust fund set up by the children's grandmother, a very wealthy woman who had passed away 2 years before Gabriel was born. Her will divided the fortune among her grandchildren. But there was a clause. If any heir was deemed incapable of managing their own affairs due to serious medical conditions, their share would be managed by a guardian until the age of 21. Julia's stomach turned. And who would that guardian be? The closest family member with proven administrative capabilities. In practice, that would be Tyler, since Robert would be busy running the main company. So you're saying that Tyler, Julia could barely form the words, that he deliberately kept Gabriel deaf to control his money? I'm saying there are too many coincidences, and that I have documents that prove the records were tampered with. Dr. Lewis was pale. That's monstrous. It's criminal, Charles corrected. And I was an accomplice. I've lived with this guilt for 8 years. When I saw the video, I knew I had to speak up. Julia picked up her phone. We have to tell Robert. No! Charles grabbed her wrist. If Tyler finds out I'm talking, my life is in danger. He has connections, power. This has to be done carefully. How? It was Dr. Lewis who answered. We need more proof. Bank records, documentation from the trust fund, testimony from other people involved. Something solid enough that Tyler can't deny or destroy it. Julia looked at Isabella, who was drawing peacefully, oblivious to the gravity of their discussion. She thought of Gabriel, of his 8 stolen years, and she knew she couldn't back down now. Then let's get that proof. But what none of them knew was that, at that very moment, Tyler was at the mansion talking to Robert, and the subject of their conversation was exactly how to remove Julia from Gabriel's life for good. She's a liability, Tyler argued. She performed a medical procedure without authorization. She could sue you, claim she was forced, make up any story. The best thing to do is offer her a generous sum to sign a non-disclosure agreement and leave. Robert was tired, confused, still processing the revelations of the last 24 hours. She saved my son. She violated protocol. If something had gone wrong, Gabriel could have been permanently injured. Think about that. Robert massaged his temples. Tyler had always been his right-hand man, the cousin who managed the business side while Robert handled the creative end. He trusted this man. Why would he doubt him now? Let me think. Don't take too long. Every day she stays here, it gets harder to control. The narrative. After Tyler left, Robert went up to Gabriel's room. The boy was asleep, with Isabella curled up beside him like a cat, also sleeping. They both looked so small, so vulnerable. For the first time in 8 years, Robert felt something he had forgotten, true paternal love. He knelt beside the bed and whispered, I'm sorry. For everything. Gabriel didn't hear. He was fast asleep. But maybe, somehow he felt it, because in his sleep, he smiled. Outside the mansion, the reporters still kept watch. Inside, 8-year-old secrets were beginning to crack like ice under the sun, and, in the city, 3 unlikely people were conspiring to bring to light a truth that some would kill to keep buried. The storm was just beginning. The next 10 days were a whirlwind. Robert hired the country's top hearing specialists to examine Gabriel. They all confirmed the same thing. The removal of the obstruction had been successful. The boy had perfect hearing in his right ear. The left still had a similar blockage, but now, with proper professional care, it could be treated without risk. Gabriel had speech therapy 3 times a week. His first words were clumsy, garbled, but they improved quickly. His young, adaptable brain absorbed every sound like a sponge. In a week, he was forming short sentences. In 2, he was conversing hesitantly but comprehensibly. The transformation was beautiful to watch, but it was also painful, because every word Gabriel spoke was a reminder of the 8 years he had spent in unnecessary silence. Julia remained at the mansion, now officially hired as Gabriel's primary caregiver. Robert had publicly acknowledged his mistake in accusing her, and her role in the boy's recovery was being celebrated on social media. But she didn't feel like a hero. She felt like an ordinary woman who had done what anyone should do: help. Isabella and Gabriel were inseparable. The girl taught the boy to identify sounds, to associate noises with objects. They played Guess the Sound, where Isabella would make noises, and Gabriel would try to name them. Laughter filled the mansion for the first time in nearly a decade, but away from everyone's eyes, Julia, Dr. Lewis, and Charles worked in secret. They needed concrete proof against Tyler, and time was not on their side. Charles managed to access the hospital's old records through a contact still working in the archives. He found physical copies of the original medical requests, the ones that had been deleted from the digital system. 3 different doctors, on 3 consecutive days, had requested the removal of the obstruction, and in all 3 cases, the denial was signed with Tyler's administrative code. Dr. Lewis investigated the subsequent medical history. All the specialists who had examined Gabriel in the following years were renowned international doctors, but curiously they all had connections to the same medical consulting firm, a firm in which Tyler was a silent partner. The plot was becoming clearer. Tyler had orchestrated a network of false diagnoses, paying or manipulating specialists to confirm a condition that didn't exist, all to maintain control over Gabriel's inheritance. Julia brought the final piece of the puzzle. In the personal files Robert kept at home, she found documents from the grandmother's trust fund. Gabriel's inheritance was astronomical, $42 million, and the clause was there, exactly as Charles had described. In the event of the heir's proven incapacity, administration would pass to a designated guardian. In the original document, signed by the grandmother months before her passing, the named guardian was Robert. But in a later addendum, dated 2 weeks after Gabriel's birth, there was a change. Should the father be unavailable or incapacitated for the role, guardianship will pass to the second in the familial line of succession with administrative qualifications. That addendum had been drafted by a lawyer from the family company, a lawyer who was a personal friend of Tyler's. With all the pieces assembled, Julia, Dr. Lewis, and Charles met again. "Is it enough?" Julia asked. "To raise questions, yes," Dr. Lewis replied. "To prove it criminally, maybe not. Tyler is smart. He left few direct fingerprints. But it's enough for Robert to open his eyes," Charles added. "And when he starts investigating with his resources, with real lawyers, he'll find a lot more." The problem was how to present this to Robert without alerting Tyler. He still had full access to the mansion, to the company's files, to everything. If he knew he was being investigated, he could destroy evidence. It was Isabella who, unknowingly, created the perfect opportunity. One Sunday afternoon, she was drawing in the living room when Robert passed by. He had started interacting more with the children, trying to make up for lost time with Gabriel. "What are you drawing?" he asked, genuinely curious. Isabella held up the drawing. It was a complex image for a 7-year-old. Several stick figures, one of them separated from the others by a thick black line, with symbols that looked like dollar signs floating in the air. "It's a story my mom told me," Isabella explained, "about a bad man who hid a treasure from the person who was supposed to get it." Robert felt a strange unease. "What kind of story?" "I don't know." She was talking to the ear doctor and a man with white hair. They were talking quietly. "But I heard some things." Robert's heart sped up. "Isabella, can you tell me what you heard?" The girl hesitated, realizing she might have said something she shouldn't have. But Robert knelt to her level, his voice gentle. "I won't be mad. I just want to understand." And then Isabella, with the brutal innocence of children, told him everything she had absorbed from the conversations she wasn't supposed to have heard. Names, fragments of conversations, what her mother said on the phone when she thought her daughter wasn't paying attention. Robert listened in growing silence. When the girl finished, he thanked her, asked her not to tell anyone they had talked, and went directly to Julia's room. The woman was folding clothes when he entered without knocking. She jumped, dropping a shirt on the floor. "Mr. Miller, you're investigating my cousin." It wasn't a question. Julia's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to stay calm. Yes. Why? And then Julia told him every discovery, every document, every connection they had traced. Robert listened without interrupting, his face growing paler with each revelation. When she finished, he walked to the window and stood there for a long moment. Tyler is my cousin, practically a brother. I trusted him with my life. I know, and I'm sorry, but someone had to... Do you have this proof? Yes. Show me. Julia took Robert to her room, where she kept copies of everything in a folder hidden under the mattress. He spent 2 hours reviewing every document, every note, every line of evidence. His expression went from disbelief to anger, from anger to devastation. My son, he whispered finally. My son spent 8 years in silence because my own cousin for money. It seems so. Robert closed the folder, his hands shaking. I need time to process this, to decide what to do. Of course, but Mr. Miller, he can't know that you know, not yet. I understand. But maintaining normalcy proved impossible. At the next company meeting, Robert could barely look at Tyler. Every comment from his cousin, every friendly gesture, every smile felt like a knife. Tyler noticed the change. Is everything okay? He asked after the meeting when they were alone. Yeah, just still processing everything that's happened. With Gabriel, that's understandable. But look on the bright side, he's recovering. Robert had to use all his strength not to explode right there. Yeah, the bright side. Tyler watched him closely. Are you sure you're okay? You seem distant. I'm tired, that's all. But Tyler didn't buy it. He had known Robert for too long, knew how to read his expressions. Something had changed, and people who keep secrets know how to recognize when they're being discovered. That night, Tyler made several calls from a burner phone. He called the lawyer who had drafted the addendum to the will, the consulting doctor who had coordinated the false diagnoses, even Charles, trying to probe what the man knew. Charles didn't answer. He was in a cheap hotel on the other side of town, in hiding, afraid his betrayal of silence would be discovered. Dr. Lewis sensed the danger, too. He started getting strange calls. Unfamiliar cars would park in front of his clinic. Someone was investigating the investigators. And at the mansion on a moonless night, something terrible happened. Gabriel woke up in the middle of the night, thirsty. He went downstairs to the kitchen alone, turning on lights as he went. He was getting water when he heard voices coming from his father's office. Curious, he approached. The door was ajar. He recognized his father's voice and Tyler's voice, and he heard words an 8-year-old shouldn't hear. You need to get rid of that woman, Tyler was saying. Julia is poking around where she shouldn't be. If she keeps digging, she's going to find things that will destroy everything. She saved my son. She's also poisoning you against me. Don't you see that? You've changed ever since she showed up. Maybe I've changed for good reasons. Robert, be reasonable. Our family, our company, everything we've built together is at risk. This woman is a threat. Gabriel didn't hear the rest. He ran back to his room, his heart pounding, and woke up Isabella, who was sleeping on a mattress next to his bed. Bella, he whispered, his voice trembling. We have to warn your mum. Something's wrong. Really wrong. And in that moment, in a mansion that hid 8 years of lies, 2 children decided they would not stay silent. Even if it meant facing dangers they could barely comprehend. Gabriel and Isabella woke Julia at 3 in the morning. The woman was in a deep sleep when she felt their small hands urgently shaking her shoulder. She opened her, eyes confused, and saw the 2 young faces marked with worry. Miss Julia, Gabriel whispered, his voice still a bit slurred but clear. Uncle Tyler wants to do something bad to you. I heard him. Julia sat up immediately, her heart racing. What did you hear, sweetie? Gabriel recounted, with the frightening accuracy of someone who had just discovered the power of words. Every phrase Tyler had said, every threatening tone, every dangerous insinuation. Julia listened with a growing knot in her stomach. She had to get out of there. She had to protect the children. But how could she escape a mansion guarded 24 hours a day, where every door had cameras, every hallway had security guards? You 2 go back to bed, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Pretend you're sleeping. I'll handle this. How? Isabella asked, her eyes wide with fear. Trust me. The children went back to Gabriel's room. Julia dressed quickly, her mind working furiously. She grabbed her phone and called Dr. Lewis. He answered on the third ring, his voice sleepy. Julia, it's 3 a.m. He knows. Tyler knows we're investigating. I have to get out of here. Dr. Lewis was instantly alert. Where are you? At the mansion. But I can't just walk out. The guards will stop me. They'll alert Robert or worse, Tyler. Hold on. I'll think of something. 20 minutes later, the plan was set. Dr. Lewis would call the mansion's emergency line, identify himself as Gabriel's doctor, and say he needed to see him immediately for a routine checkup that couldn't wait. Julia and the children would use the confusion to slip out. It was risky, but it was possible. At 4:30 a.m., the security center's phone rang. The drowsy supervisor answered and heard Dr. Lewis explain that Gabriel was showing worrisome symptoms that needed immediate evaluation. The man hesitated, but the doctor was convincing. He'd be there in 15 minutes. Julia woke the children again. We're going for a walk. No noise. They went down the back stairs, which led directly to the service area. Julia knew every camera, every blind spot in the surveillance system. She guided the children along routes she had memorized during her months working there. When they reached the side gate, the one usually left unlocked for morning deliveries, they ran into a problem. There was a new padlock. Julia felt panic rise. Tyler was prepared. He had already tightened security. Now what? Gabriel whispered. Isabella pointed to a nearby tree. We climb it and jump the wall. It was crazy. The wall was 10 feet high, but Julia looked back and saw lights turning on the 3rd floor. Someone was waking up. They had no choice. She helped the children climb the tree, then climbed up herself. The branch groaned under her weight, but held. On the other side of the wall, Dr. Lewis was waiting in his old car. Isabella jumped first, landing in a flower bed. That cushioned her fall. Gabriel jumped next, scraping his knee but not seriously injuring himself. Julia was about to jump when she heard the voice behind her. Going somewhere? She froze. She turned and saw Tyler standing under the tree, his arms crossed, a cold smile on his face. He wasn't alone. 2 security guards flanked him. Get down, now. Julia looked at the children on the other side of the wall. Dr. Lewis was already running toward them. At least they would be safe. I said, get down. Julia climbed down slowly. Her feet touched the ground, and she faced Tyler with a courage she didn't know she had. You're not going to intimidate me. Intimidate you? Tyler laughed. Julia, you trespassed on private property, performed an illegal medical procedure, and now you are trying to flee with the owner's son. Who do you think is going to believe you? Robert will. Robert is confused, traumatized. He doesn't know who to trust, and I'm going to make sure he chooses to trust me. One of the guards moved to grab Julia, but she stepped back. Touch me and I'll scream. I'll wake up the whole mansion. Scream all you want. It will only confirm that you're unhinged. That's when a voice cut through the darkness. Let her go. Robert was on the 2nd floor balcony, wearing only a robe, his hair disheveled, but his voice carried an authority Julia had never heard before. Tyler turned, surprised. Robert, good, you're awake. This woman was trying to run off with Gabriel. I know. I asked her to. The silence was absolute. Tyler blinked several times, trying to process it. You... what? Robert came down the stairs slowly, each step measured. When he reached the garden, he stopped a few feet from Tyler. I know everything. The false diagnoses, the money, the paid-off doctors, everything. Tyler tried to smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. $42 million. Gabriel's inheritance. You needed him declared incompetent so you could manage the money. So you orchestrated everything to keep him deaf. Years stolen from my son's life for greed. This is insane. You're listening to a disgruntled employee who... I have proof, Robert interrupted. Documents, witnesses, recordings, everything. Tyler turned pale. Robert, you're my cousin. Practically my brother. How can you believe this? Because I've spent the last 48 hours investigating. Because I called every doctor who examined Gabriel, because I traced every suspicious bank transaction, and because, above all, I know you. I know that look you get when you want something, and I saw it in your eyes when Gabriel spoke for the first time. Tyler took a step back. His mask of affability was beginning to crack. If you expose me, you'll destroy the company. Half the contracts are in my name. Investors trust me. I don't care. My son matters, and he spent 8 years in the dark because of you. That's when something inside Tyler broke. Years of resentment, of envy disguised as loyalty, of bitterness hidden under smiles, all came pouring out. You never deserved any of it, he screamed, his voice echoing through the garden. Everything was handed to you. The company, the respect, the fortune. And me? I was always the assistant, the useful cousin, the one doing the dirty work while you got to shine. Gabriel was my chance to have what was mine by right. None of it was yours by right, and definitely not my son's life. Your son should be grateful. I gave him 8 years of peace, of silence, without the pressure, without the expectations, without the weight of being a miller. Robert took a step forward, and for the first time in her life, Julia saw true fury on his controlled face. You gave him nothing. You stole. You stole the sound of his own voice. You stole his chance to know the mother who died to bring him into this world. You stole my chance to be a father. Marianne. Tyler said the name with venom. Always Marianne. She thought she was better than all of us, too. And then, in a split second, something clicked in Robert's mind. You were at the hospital when he was born. You had administrative access. Tyler smiled, and it was the most terrifying smile Julia had ever seen. You're finally getting it. What did you do? What had to be done? Marianne never respected me, treated me like a servant. And then, when I found out about the grandmother's will, I realized she was in my way. Robert lunged, but the guards held him back. Julia had to cover her mouth to keep from screaming. You killed my wife. I corrected a mistake. I was given the wrong medication. So simple, so quick. And when the baby was born with that ridiculous obstruction, I saw a golden opportunity. Keep him incompetent, manage his fortune, finally get the respect I deserve. You're a monster. I'm a realist. And if you hadn't been so blinded by grief, you would have seen through me years ago. Robert broke free from the guards, his voice low but lethal. You're going to pay for everything. For Marianne. For Gabriel. For every day you stole. Tyler laughed, a humorless sound. With what proof? All you have are documents I can deny, witnesses I can buy, and a story so absurd no court will believe it. But he didn't know one thing. On the other side of the wall, Dr. Lewis had recorded the entire conversation on his phone, and Isabella, hidden behind the doctor's car, had drawn everything. Every confession, every expression, every moment of Tyler's mask falling away. A 7-year-old girl, with her photographic memory turned into art, had captured evidence that no lawyer could refute. When Robert finally processed it all, when the reality of Tyler's words settled in his mind, he fell to his knees. The weight of 8 years of guilt, of loneliness, of denied love, crushed his shoulders. And in that garden, under the faint light of dawn, as Tyler was finally confronted with his crimes, Robert Miller wept for the first time since his son was born. The following days were a blur of lawyers, authorities, and a relentless media. The recording made by Dr. Lewis spread like wildfire. Not on social media this time, but through official channels. Prosecutors, detectives, auditors. They all wanted to hear the confession of Tyler Miller, admitting to financial fraud, tampering with medical records, and, most shockingly, his role in Marianne's death. Tyler tried to recant. He said he was under pressure, that he'd said things he didn't mean, that Robert had provoked him, but his own words, recorded with crystal clarity, condemned him. There was no going back. He was removed from all positions at the company. His bank accounts were frozen. Investigators delved into 8 years of transactions, revealing a complex web of embezzlement that went far beyond Gabriel's inheritance. He had stolen from the family company, from investment funds, from people who had trusted him. Robert testified in all the legal proceedings. He spoke of the years of grief, of forced emotional distance, of a son he loved but couldn't love the right way. Every word was its own confession, an admission of failures he'd never had the courage to express. "I blamed him," Robert said in one of the hearings, his voice breaking. "I blamed Gabriel for being alive when Marianne wasn't. It's a horrible thing to admit, but it's the truth. And now to find out she was deliberately taken from me, that my own cousin—" He couldn't finish. The judge called for a recess. Meanwhile, at the mansion, changes were happening. Gabriel was making remarkable progress. His vocabulary grew daily. He started attending a special school with teachers trained to work with children experiencing language delay. It was hard. He would get frustrated when he couldn't express complex thoughts. But Isabella was always there, patient, encouraging. "You've already done so much," she would say. "You learned to hear in 8 days. Talking will be easy." Julia watched the two children with a mix of pride and sadness. Isabella had matured in ways no 7-year-old should have to. She saw things, understood things, carried burdens that weren't fair. But she had also found purpose in this chaotic journey. One day Gabriel asked Julia, "Where's my Uncle Tyler?" It was the first time he'd mentioned the name since that night in the garden. Julia knelt to his level. He did bad things, and when people do bad things, they have to face the consequences. Did he make me deaf on purpose? Yes. Gabriel processed this in silence. Then he asked, "Why?" "For money, for power, but also for something darker, envy." "What's envy?" "It's when you want what someone else has so badly that you do bad things to get it." Gabriel thought for a long moment. "Should I be angry?" "You can be angry, it's normal. But I'm not. I'm just sad. For the things I lost. For the years I didn't have with Dad." Julia felt tears sting her eyes. "You're wise for an 8-year-old. "No. I just found out that anger hurts more than sadness, and I don't want any more things that hurt." Those words echoed in Julia's mind for days. Meanwhile, Robert was making difficult decisions. The company needed to be restructured. Investors were nervous. Clients were questioning the organization's integrity. He hired external auditors, implemented new oversight protocols, and forced transparency in every department. But the work that truly mattered was happening at home. Robert started therapy for the first time in his life. He needed to process the loss of Marianne in a healthy way, to understand his grief, to forgive himself for the emotional distance he had imposed on Gabriel. "I'm scared," he admitted to his therapist. "Scared that it's too late, that my son won't be able to forgive me." "Have you apologized to him?" "Yes, several times." "And what did he say?" Robert smiled for the first time in weeks. "He said he didn't. No, he needed to forgive me, because he never blamed me for anything." The therapist nodded. Children have an incredible capacity for forgiveness. The hard part is usually forgiving ourselves. 3 months after Tyler's confession, the trial began. The courtroom was packed with journalists, families of Tyler's other victims, and curious onlookers. Robert sat in the front row, Julia beside him. Gabriel and Isabella stayed home with a tutor, shielded from the circus the trial had become. Tyler entered in handcuffs, his face thin, his eyes sunken. He had aged 10 years in 3 months. When his eyes met Robert's, there was no more arrogance, just something that might have been remorse, or perhaps just self-pity. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically, the doctored documents, the suspicious bank transactions, the testimony from Charles, from Dr. Lewis, from every piece of the puzzle. And then the recording. The entire room heard Tyler confess, in his own words, to every crime. The defense tried to argue psychological pressure, claiming Tyler was having an emotional breakdown when he made those statements. But the numbers didn't lie, the documents didn't lie. The truth, finally exposed to the light, was undeniable. However, proving responsibility in Marianne's death was more complex. Medical records from that night had been partially destroyed. Witnesses were scarce. The prosecution had the confession, but defense attorneys argued that confessions under emotional distress weren't enough without physical evidence. The judge deliberated for 2 weeks. When he finally delivered the sentence, the room fell completely silent. Tyler Miller, you are found guilty of financial fraud, forgery, corruption of medical professionals, and medical negligence resulting in grievous harm to a minor. The evidence related to the most serious crime, concerning the death of Marianne Miller, is too circumstantial for a definitive conviction at this time, but it remains under investigation. Tyler would get 15 years with no possibility of parole for the first 7. In addition, all his assets would be seized to reimburse the victims of his schemes. Robert felt no triumph, just an immense emptiness. 15 years seemed like too little for what was stolen, but at least Gabriel was safe. At least the truth had been told. Leaving the courthouse, Robert found Charles waiting on the sidewalk. The man approached timidly. "Mr. Miller, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for staying silent for so long. I know it doesn't redeem me, but—" Robert cut him off. "You came forward when it mattered. You helped expose the truth. That means something." Charles nodded, his eyes moist, and walked away. Julia was leaning against the car, waiting. "Now what?" she asked. "Now I'm going home. I'm going to have dinner with my son. I'm going to listen to him tell me about his day at school. I'm going to be the father I always should have been. And the grief? The grief never goes away completely. I'll always miss Marianne, but I've learned something these past few months. Grieving doesn't mean you stop living. It means you learn to live with the absence." They drove back to the mansion in silence. When they arrived, they found Gabriel and Isabella in the garden, drawing with colored chalk on the pavement. The 2 children looked up when they saw the car. "Dad!" Gabriel ran over, his pronunciation still imperfect but full of emotion. Robert knelt and hugged him tightly, feeling the small weight of the body he had neglected for so long. "Hey, champ, did you miss me?" "I always miss you, even when you're here." The simple observation broke something inside Robert. "I know, but I'm trying to change that. Can you forgive me for taking so long?" Gabriel pulled back and looked him in the eyes. "You're my dad. I'll always forgive you." And in that garden, where months earlier horrible secrets had been revealed, something new began to grow. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of actively chosen love, the conscious decision to rebuild what had been destroyed. Isabella watched from a distance, her chalk drawings showing a colorful house with 4 smiling figures. Julia walked over and asked, "Who are those people?" "It's us," Isabella replied. "Our weird family, but it's ours." And it was. A family forged not by blood but by choice, by shared suffering and the healing they achieved together. But there was still one last revelation waiting in the shadows, a final truth that would change everything one more time, and it would come from where no one expected. 6 months had passed since the trial. Life in the mansion had completely transformed. The walls that once echoed with silence now vibrated with the sounds of life. Laughter, conversations, even the occasional arguments that healthy families have. Gabriel was attending a regular school, now with support from speech therapists. He had made friends, joined activities, and was discovering the world that had been denied to him. He still struggled with certain sounds, certain complex linguistic concepts, but his progress was extraordinary. Isabella remained his best friend and protector. She defended him from kids who asked insensitive questions, translated when he couldn't express himself clearly, and celebrated every victory as if it were her own. Robert had sold off part of the company to focus on smaller projects that truly interested him. He had lunch with Gabriel 3 times a week, attended his school, soccer games, and was present. He wasn't a perfect father. He still stumbled sometimes, but he was trying, and that's what mattered. Julia remained at the mansion, no longer as an employee, but as part of the family. Robert had insisted that she and Isabella stay, offering them one of the wings as a permanent residence. "You saved my son," he had said, "and in a way, you saved me too." It was on a Sunday afternoon, while Robert was organizing documents in his office, that he found something he had never seen before. It was a box tucked away, in the back of a closet, dusty with Marianne's handwriting on the lid. "For Robert, open only if something happens to me." His heart raced. He stared at the box for several minutes, his hands trembling. Why would Marianne leave something like this? Had she foreseen her own death? Carefully, he opened the lid. Inside were letters, photos, and a sealed envelope with just one word on it: truth. Robert opened the envelope with trembling fingers and began to read. The letter was dated 1 week before Gabriel's birth. My love, if you are reading this, it means something. Has gone terribly wrong. I hope I'm just being paranoid, but I need to get this down in case my fears are confirmed. I've discovered something about Tyler. He is not who you think he is. I found documents showing financial embezzlement from the company, manipulations, lies. I confronted him 2 weeks ago. He threatened me, Robert. He said that if I told you, I would regret it. I have copies of everything hidden in a safe deposit box at the bank. The key is with my attorney, Clara Miller. She knows what to do if anything happens to me. But there's more, and this is the hardest part to write. Tyler is not your cousin, Robert. He is your half-brother. Your father had an affair with his aunt years before you were born. When I discovered this while investigating the company finances, I understood why Tyler was always so close, always had access to everything. Your grandmother knew the truth and made sure he was taken care of, but she kept it a secret to protect your father. Tyler found out the truth 3 years ago, and ever since he has been planning a way to get what's his by right, as he told me himself. I'm afraid of him, Robert. I'm afraid of what he might do. If you are reading this, please protect our baby. Protect yourself. And do not trust him, no matter how convincing he is. I love you. I will always love you. Marianne. Robert read and reread the letter. His hands were shaking so badly the paper nearly fell. Marianne had known. She had known everything and tried to protect him. And he, blinded by trust, had never suspected a thing. He picked up the phone and called the attorney mentioned in the letter. Clara Miller had been retired for years but still took occasional calls. When Robert identified himself and mentioned Marianne, there was a long silence. I wondered when you would finally find that letter, she said. I've been holding onto a box of her documents for 8 years, waiting for you to come looking. Why didn't you come to me? Marianne made me promise I would only give you the documents if you came to me. She said you needed to be ready to see the truth, that forcing it on you would be destructive. Can I see the documents? So you can, but be prepared. What's in there will change your perception of a lot of things. The next day, Robert went to Clara's office. The woman, now in her 70s, handed him a thick folder. Inside were years of private investigation that Marianne had conducted, financial documents proving Tyler's embezzlement, DNA tests confirming the fraternal relationship, and most disturbing, recordings. Marianne had recorded conversations with Tyler. In the last one, dated 3 days before she gave birth, the tension was palpable. You can't tell him. Tyler's voice sounded desperate. It will destroy everything. He deserves to know the truth, Marianne replied, her voice firm. The truth is I've been treated like a second-class cousin my whole life, while Robert got everything. The name, the respect, the company, and now you want to take even that from me. It's not yours. It never was. And the baby? Is he going to get everything too? Another generation pushing me to the side? Stay away from my son. The recording ended there. 3 days later, Marianne was dead. Robert listened to it all with tears streaming down his face. Marianne had tried to save him. She had tried to save Gabriel. And she had paid for it with her life. He took everything to the authorities. With this new evidence, the investigation into Marianne's death was reopened. Toxicology analyses were redone with more modern technology. And finally, 8 years too late, the truth emerged. Marianne had been deliberately poisoned with a medication that caused cardiovascular collapse. Tyler was indicted for first-degree murder. His sentence was reviewed and increased to 30 years. This time there was no doubt no loopholes. Justice was late, but it was absolute. Robert returned home that night completely shattered. He had lost 8 years with his son because of a man he now knew was his brother, and he had lost his wife because she tried to protect them from a poisonous truth. Gabriel found him sitting in the office, his face buried in his hands. The boy approached timidly. "Dad, are you okay?" Robert looked up, his eyes red from crying. "No, but I will be." Gabriel climbed into his lap, something he never did. Miss Julia says that sometimes we have to be sad before we can be happy again. That's true. So you can be sad now, I'll wait. Robert hugged his son tightly, feeling the small weight of that body, the warmth of that presence he had almost let slip away. Thank you, champ. The following weeks were difficult. Robert properly processed his grief for Marianne for the first time. He cried, he remembered, he celebrated who she was, and finally, slowly, he began to forgive himself for not seeing the signs, for not protecting her when she needed it most. Julia was always there, not as a replacement for Marianne, but as a friend, as a shoulder to lean on. You couldn't have known, she would say. Tyler fooled everyone. But Marianne knew, and she tried to warn me. And now you're honoring her by protecting Gabriel. It's what she would have wanted. The mansion underwent physical changes as well. Robert turned one of the rooms into a memorial for Marianne, with photos, letters, and memories. Gabriel would spend time there, learning about the mother he never knew through the stories his father finally had the courage to tell. Isabella was changing too. She had stopped drawing sad pictures. Now her drawings showed beautiful things. Families together, children playing, flowers growing in sunny gardens. The grief for her brother Peter was still there, but it no longer dominated her. A year after Tyler's confession, on a particularly beautiful spring day, Robert gathered everyone in the garden. He had prepared something special. You all changed my life, he began, looking at Julia, Isabella, and Gabriel. You brought me out of the darkness, you showed me there was still light, and I want to do something to mark that. He unveiled a plaque that would be installed at the mansion's entrance. It read, The Marianne Miller House, where love and courage conquer silence. This is no longer just a mansion, Robert explained. It's a home. And in memory of Marianne, I want to turn it into a refuge for children who need help, for families going through hardship, for anyone who needs a safe place. Julia had tears in her eyes. Robert, you're going to help me run it. You understand what it's like to fight, what it's like to protect the ones you love against all odds. Isabella tugged on Robert's sleeve. What about me? Can I help too? Robert knelt to her level. You've already helped more than you can imagine. You saw what the adults didn't. You believed, when no one else did. You saved a boy that not even the doctors could save. I just wanted him to be my friend, Isabella said simply. And sometimes, Robert replied, the greatest miracles begin with the simplest intentions. Gabriel hugged Isabella. His speech was almost perfect now, though he still had a unique accent from someone who learned language late. You're more than my friend. You're my sister. You always will be. That afternoon, they planted a tree in the garden, a cherry tree which Marianne had loved, and beneath it they buried a time capsule with messages, drawings, and promises. Gabriel wrote, I will always remember that silence is not weakness, and that love is louder than any noise. Isabella drew 4 figures holding hands under a rainbow. Julia wrote, Courage sometimes means doing what's right even when it's scary. And Robert wrote, Marianne, you are in every sound our son hears, in every word he speaks, in every moment of love I have finally learned to give. Thank you for protecting us, even after you were gone. Life would never be perfect. There would be hard days, painful memories, scars that would never completely fade. But there, in that garden bathed in spring sunlight, was something more powerful than pain. There was hope. Gabriel ran across the lawn, laughing loudly, the sound of his own voice bringing him infinite joy. Isabella ran after him, yelling for him to slow down. Julia and Robert watched side by side, 2 people whom tragedy had brought together, and who now actively chose to build something beautiful from the rubble. Do you think she would be proud? Robert asked, looking up at the sky. Marianne, Julia replied. I think she always was. She was just waiting for you to notice. And maybe it was true. Maybe, from somewhere beyond what they could see, Marianne was watching and smiling to see that her son had not only regained his hearing, but had found his voice. That her husband had not only survived his grief, but had learned to live again. That evil had been exposed, punished, and defeated. The silence that once dominated that mansion had been replaced by the chaotic and beautiful symphony of life. Laughter, conversations, even occasional fights. Everything that makes a house a home. And in that moment, under the cloudless blue sky, with the children playing and the future open before them, they understood something fundamental. That redemption doesn't come from erasing the past, but from choosing day after day to build a better future. That families aren't just about blood, but about choices. That love isn't just a feeling, but a constant action. Gabriel stopped running and looked at his father. "Dad, listen! A bird!" And Robert listened, not just to the bird, but to the joy in his son's voice, to the life pulsing in that simple moment. He closed his eyes and gave a silent thank you, for Julia, who had courage when no one else did, for Isabella, who saw what no one else saw, for Dr. Lewis and Charles, who chose to speak when it was easier to be silent, and for Marianne, who, even in her absence, continued to guide them. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, accumulated moments, in every word Gabriel learned, in every night Robert managed to sleep without nightmares, in every colorful drawing by Isabella, in every day Julia woke up and chose to believe she had done the right thing. And there, in that house that was once a fortress of silence, and was now a sanctuary of sound, an unlikely but real family wrote their ending. Not a fairy tale ending where everything is perfect, but an honest one, where what was broken was glued back together, where scars became reminders of strength, where the future was uncertain but finally possible. Because sometimes the truest miracles aren't the ones that happen suddenly, but the ones we build together, one day at a time.